I'm pregnant.
What?
Whoa.
Okay. Wait, are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
We are talking The Woods Are Real, and this is a somewhat open for interpretation movie. It is effectively a folk horror. Let me give you the kind of synopsis and then we'll kind of go into a little bit more detail about it. So it focuses on a couple from New York who are quite well off, they're quite wealthy. The guy has a kind of inheritance from a family business of kind of watchmakers, so you know, they're quite well off, they kind of enjoy the fruits of their labour, so to speak, but they like to kind of think they are good people giving to charities and setting up charitable donations and things like this. And they are effectively gaslit by a kind of mutual friend into going to this kind of spiritual retreat out in the forest somewhere, because this friend ultimately challenges them on their kind of charity work, saying it's just kind of for show. You need to do kind of, you know, you need to kind of go to this spiritual retreat and really kind of open your mind. So they kind of feel somewhat kind of challenged, and that's what they do. And upon arriving, it's weird things almost immediately happen, and they've got this kind of old sort of farmhouse, and they're kind of driven out by some strange events. And now they appear to be kind of lost in this sort of endless forest. And it appears nature or spiritualism or God perhaps is challenging them and making them effectively question their, you know, virtue signaling, for lack of a better word, and it's kind of testing them to see how good they actually are compared to how good they think they are. At least that is the perception. In the woods they meet a variety of people, including a woodsman played by Campbell Scott, who's kind of the recognisable name to this movie, who seems to be, you know, somewhat kind of crazed. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Now, as I mentioned, this movie I feel is somewhat left up to interpretation. You know, it's kind of art housey in a way. So let me give you my interpretation of that. Although I will preface this by saying I may have got the wrong end of the stick with this one, because this movie, I would say, the narrative isn't particularly clear, and let me explain why. To me, and you may have already picked up on it, this almost seems to kind of be somewhat of a satire of modern liberalism in a way. We have this kind of interracial couple. The guy experimented with, you know, men, things like this. They have gay friends. They're very much kind of all about the causes and things like that. Whenever we have dialogue which isn't directly to do with something that's happening on screen, it's more or less talking about kind of like left-wing political kind of talking points and things like that. So it's very clearly setting these people up as very kind of like woke, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then ultimately what the movie is doing, at least my interpretation of it, is kind of saying to them, you know, you took the talk, but can you walk the walk effectively? You talk about wanting this better world, etc., but are you prepared to make a sacrifice for it? That's my interpretation, but I will say it could be that this is just a very left-leaning movie and these people are just kind of having dialogue. I kind of think it's satire, but without being an out-and-out kind of comedy. It's not like comedic at all, but it's just kind of like you know, pointing out the kind of somewhat hypocrisy. At least that is what I think it is doing. I do think that is the idea behind this movie. But I will say I could be wrong, and it could actually be these characters are just very, very like-minded that with politically, if that makes sense. So there you go. So let's talk about what I do think works in this movie. So the movie, in the narrative of the movie, the A to B of the journey of the movie, it's not clear what is happening. But what I would say is that at least the movie kind of puts us in the same position as our protagonists, because they don't really understand what's going on, at least initially. And I think you because of that, you kind of go on the journey with them. So even though I'm watching this film and I'm not really understanding what it is that's happening, because the movie is very kind of like surreal in some way, just not explaining to you what's kind of going on, but the characters are also in this, don't know. So you can kind of latch onto them. In that respect, the movie kind of takes you on a journey, at least to a point. There's a point in the movie where I feel, at least the characters seem to get it, and I always still like, I'm still really not sure what is going on, but there is, to at least for the most part, at least I felt like I was going on the journey with the characters. And I found the kind of the mystery, because it is so vague about the kind of like the setup here. It's kind of like, what is going on? It's somewhat of an intriguing mystery. Like the friend that kind of sort of gaslit this couple, he turns up again and I think, well, how did you get here? What's actually kind of going on? What kind of forces are at work here? Is it satisfying? Is it concluded? Well, let's talk about that in a minute. But yeah, at least I was kind of somewhat intrigued by the kind of the premise here. And if indeed this movie is a satire of kind of like liberal politics and kind of that sort of side of things, it's an interesting concept, and I think it's kind of one that is tackled in a kind of an interesting kind of manner. I think the performances are all okay for the most part, at least from our main players, our couple and the woodsman, who I suppose are the main three. There are a smattering of like supporting characters that maybe I felt overacted a little bit, and then we have this kind of natural environment, and it's all kind of relatively well shot, and that kind of uses the kind of the woods as this, force of nature which is kind of surrounding them, and kind of ultimately kind of like, puny human problems, psh, all that stuff you're worrying about, whoosh. And there's a little bit of kind of commentary, as I say in this one. There's not a lot of commentary about, these people kind of doing token justice for kind of charity when their kind of wealth has come from the kind of the blood and sweat of people working in kind of sweatshops and things like this. So it's very kind of a messagey movie in some ways. But let's talk about what doesn't work in this movie. I mean, it's not clear what is going on, let me just say. I mean, I was kind of going on for the ride and thinking, do you know what? It's an interesting kind of premise. I'm not really sure where it's going, but I'm kind of intrigued to go along. But I never really felt like I arrived at that destination. Because I think once the movie kind of sets on its path, it's just like more of the same. It's like more sort of like, weird kind of biblical references and sort of, pointing out hypocrisy and stuff, but I didn't really feel the story kind of moved that far forward. And certainly in the last act, it completely lost me. I was like, I don't know what is going on in this movie. I'm not quite sure what is supposed to be happening. The movie is, like I said, it's relatively well put together on a technical level, but it's certainly not a flashy film. There's nothing really outstanding in regards to kind of directorial choices, I don't think. It's fine, but it's just very kind of like relatively kind of static shots in the woods and things like that. I mean, considering the movie has somewhat of a subjective feel to it, a little bit of kind of surrealness, I think maybe there could have been more done with that. I mean, I personally am not a big fan of kind of art house films. I'm not quite sure if I would class it as art house rather than just open for interpretation, but I don't know. To me, the direction was serviceable, but not spectacular. I mentioned some of the kind of the acting. I think was fine from our main players, but I don't know. There was some choices, and maybe it's more of the direction. We meet this kind of group of women, and at one point they just all start screaming, and I'm thinking, why are you doing that? What is going on? It's like a really odd choice, and it kind of scares our couple off. And I think, I don't really understand why that happened. So it's just like a little bit weird, and I think maybe this is kind of the filmmaker. I'm going to put all this kind of messaging in, but it's not clear. I don't think about what's going on, because I can't even tell really if it's actually a satire or if it's actually kind of like genuinely kind of like saying these are the kind of the characters like the story I want to tell and things like this. I do think it's a satire, however. I'll point that out. Ultimately, when we get to the end of this movie, the last act, I really didn't feel gave you any type of conclusion, and kind of it was just like more of the same, and was ultimately a little bit unsatisfying. I'm not saying it needed a spoon feed, or it could have left some things kind of left open, but I really didn't feel it kind of the journey kind of arrived at any kind of destination, in my opinion. So I think it's kind of like an interesting film that poses some interesting ideas and questions and subject matter, but the execution to me was lacking. And I think, you know, it's kind of a little bit too open to interpretation to a point that is it entertainment, this movie? I don't know. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I think it's an interesting idea, and it's serviceably made, although I don't think it's spectacular. Have you seen it, Tom? What was your interpretation, more importantly, I suppose? Please leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.